And finally, we'll have a panel from Singapore looking at how to rebound from the pandemic and to specifically discuss if the Norwegian FinTech project could be done in Singapore or indeed anywhere else.
Hello, my name is Kastmann and I'm the Director of Innovation Norway and Singapore. I'm also on the steering group of Nordic Innovation House here. At this year's Singapore FinTech Festival, some of the main themes focus on digital transformation, infrastructure and skills, all of which are clearly very important for any future recovery. COVID-19 has affected all countries around the world, but industry and government response to the pandemic has varied. In our panel, we would like to explore what has characterized successful initiatives in Singapore and in Norway, and which lessons we can draw from each other. In addition, we would like to explore how the pandemic is shaping future opportunities in the FinTech and e-commerce sectors. FinTech companies are almost by default digital and disruptive. That should leave them in pole position to take future opportunities. With me in the studio, I have three insightful persons. Magnus Grimeland is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Antler. He is an alumni of Harvard University and McKinsey & Company and was part of the team that gave you Zalora. But now he's 110% dedicated to Antler. What is this that Antler does, Magnus?
Thanks a lot, Paul, and thank you for having me here. Antler is early stage venture capital company. We support entrepreneurs really from day one to build their business. So we tend to always be the first money in for new entrepreneurs, supporting with access to co-founders, validating their business model. But we also invest all the way up to Series C. So we also invest directly into companies. We probably make about 30 to 40 FinTech investments every year in Asia, Africa, Europe, US, Australia, and support about 200 new companies every year, basically, to get off the ground and solve important problems. And obviously, the theme we're discussing today is huge. There's a tremendous amount of opportunities to innovate and capture value within this space. So very excited to have this discussion.
Great. Next on the panel is Cha Hoklai. Hoklai is the president of Singapore FinTech Association, but has had a very varied background. He is the CEO of Switch Innovate, a FinTech consultancy firm, and has previously worked at GovTech and NTUC. But today you're here primarily in the capacity of president of the SFA. Could you briefly introduce us to the SFA, Hoklai?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, Singapore FinTech Association is a non-profit cross-industry organization set up to support the growth of the FinTech sector and to facilitate collaboration among the market participants in the ecosystem. We were set up 4 years back and focus on 4 areas: providing access to talent, access to markets, access to capital, and to advocate for pro-innovation policies and regulations. So over the last 4 years, we have grown significantly. Currently, we have more than 850 corporate members and partnerships in more than 40 countries. So basically, every 4 out of 5 FinTech companies in Singapore is a SFA member, and every 1 out of 3 FinTech companies in ASEAN is a SFA member, because about 40% of ASEAN FinTech companies are based in Singapore. Thanks.
Exactly, that's an important point, the regional aspect of things here. And finally, Jan Fredrik Skjeltorp, who's the general manager of DNB Asia. He has a varied background from the bank and has been heading the Asian part of the business for a couple of years, similar amount of time as me here in Singapore. Jan Fredrik, for those in the audience that might not be all too familiar with DNB, could you briefly describe who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for having me. DNB Bank ASA is Norwegian's largest financial institution. We have been in business for almost 200 years. I think now in this new environment, that's something that is going to be very interesting and challenging going forward. I think my co-panelist here is one of, I would say, our collaborators, but also challengers. So this is interesting times. DNB is based in 18 countries around the world. We have actually around 40 branches in Norway, which has been decreasing from 300 plus a few years ago. So we are in the middle of a transition, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
Thank you so much, Jan Fredrik. Okay, and with that, I think we will move into the first segment we will discuss today. And I want to start with you, Hoklai. Singapore is enjoying a significantly strong position within FinTech and is often said to punch well beyond your weight or above your weight. What will you credit this strong position to? What's behind this growth?
I think it's very much about a strong public-private partnership that is available in Singapore and a very collaborative mindset among the ecosystem. But most importantly of all is that the leadership taken by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is also the regulator come central bank. So they have been driving FinTech quite actively. Mr. Ravi Menon, the Managing Director of MAS, set out Singapore to be a smart financial center whereby technologies are used pervasively to improve productivity, manage risk better, create opportunities, and make life better for all the residents. And then over the last 4 years, since the setup of Singapore FinTech Association, the ecosystem had only about less than 100 FinTech companies. I think through the effort of MAS and the larger community, we have grown by at least 10 times over the last 4 years. Today, there are more than 1,000 FinTech companies in Singapore and more than 40 innovation labs, because I think our FinTech strategy is not just to focus on the innovators, but also on the incumbents. So we encourage them through funding and various policies to set up their regional innovation labs in Singapore. And then over the last few years, we also managed to get a lot of venture capital firms to set up in Singapore. So today we have more than 40 VC firms, more than 150 VC firms in Singapore. That's a far cry from the early days, whereby the funds that are available are only for seed stage and Series A startups. But today, easily the Series B and Series C can get their funding in Singapore. So that in a way also makes Singapore a hub for startup venture funding. Thanks.
Thank you. No, it's fascinating. And then, of course, in the middle of this growth, then 2020 comes rolling along. And how did that affect the industry here?
Yeah, so in the mid-March, right at the start of the crisis, we sent a survey to our members. And half of them indicated that COVID-19 had significantly affected their business, both from funding, sales, and cash flow. So we started talking to MAS and then start working on something. By the 8th of April, MAS announced a 125 million Singapore dollar package for financial institutions and FinTech companies. And then for us, we work with them to come up with a FinTech certification program to certify FinTech companies that have the technology that is serving the financial services sector, so that they are eligible for the various grants. So some of the grants includes the Digital Acceleration Grant, whereby the common expenses of a typical FinTech company, such as cloud computing. A typical FinTech company will spend about $60,000 a year on cloud hosting. To help them elevate that cash flow, they are eligible to claim up to 80% of that, or up to $120,000 of that for the next 2 years. So that's one of the many grants. In fact, as of today, we have certified about 450 FinTech companies. Then 1 week later, AMTD, they by working with the ASEAN Financial Innovation Network, they came out with a 50 million AMTD ASEAN Solidarity Fund, This is to provide bridging loans, equity financing, convertible financing for fintech companies that are facing challenges in getting funding. In fact, actually, the investors still have the mandate to invest, but they are focusing more on their current portfolio. So this is to make it available for the startups that can't get the funding. And then 1 week later, we reach out to another player that is still doing quite well, especially because of the crisis, because basically the company is Razer, which is gaming. And then with them, they also roll out the US 50 million COVID-19 fund to provide similar funding solutions to the fintech companies. And then 1 month later, we roll out another grant called the Solidarity Grant together with AMTD, MAS, and SFA, a 6 million grant, which is made up of 2 components. One is the business sustenance grant to allow fintechs to pay for their salary and their rent. So we awarded this grant to more than 200 fintech companies.
Right.
And then there is a business growth grant to help them focus on growth during this period, and they can claim up to $120,000 by doing proof of concept on the API exchange platform that is created by MAS and World Bank. Yeah. So and then 1 month later, we came up with another scheme, which is what we call the compliance readiness framework to help our fintech companies more effective in engaging the financial institutions, because 80% of our members are B2B fintech. And to work with financial institutions, there are a number of regulatory requirements they have to meet, whether in terms of technology risk or cyber hygiene. So with this program, we created a digital self-assessment tool for our members to gauge their competency in relation to all these regulations. And then we organize several workshops to help them plug the gap.
Right.
So these are the things that we roll out within a 2 months period, working closely with the ecosystem, working closely with MES to help the fintech community in Singapore.
Right. I want to bring you guys also into the discussion here. I wanted to ask you, Magnus, you call yourself a generator, right? And you invest in companies. How has the pandemic affected you and your portfolio companies?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 aspects to it. So one is, obviously you've seen this incredible rapid digitalization happening over the last year. Industry is really taking a decade's leap in just a few months. And I think within FinTech, you definitely see that as well, because there's probably around, what we've seen, probably around 40% or so of the kind of population in the developed markets, but also in developing markets, who has, almost been forced to start using digital services who weren't doing it before. Because you could actually more or less function without using fintech solutions about a year ago. Now in most instances you can't, whether it's due to artificial restrictions put in by governments to the pandemic, or because you're scared about obviously getting the virus. And you see that across a lot of industries. So you have a part of your portfolio which is just growing incredibly fast off the back of that. And then you also see a number of, I think, incredibly smart people who've spent some time at home thinking through what they want to spend their next kind of 20, 30 years doing with their life, and then deciding, okay, I'm going to now spend the next decade innovating and solving a new big problem. So I think both access to talent, access to opportunities is kind of bigger than ever. And then you have a part, obviously, of the portfolio which are addressing industries where revenues have fallen a lot, right? So we have a portfolio company which was growing like crazy to become one of the biggest platforms in the world out of Singapore within their space, and suddenly they lost 96% of their revenue. And I think what is incredibly important there is ensuring that if a company is struggling, you want to understand whether they're struggling due to temporary glut which was the case for this company, or whether they would have struggled anyways. And the ones who are struggling from a temporary glut, you need to ensure that they will survive through this. And there we've seen, the government here in Singapore has been amazing, also through initiatives as the FinTech Association have put in place. Same in Norway with Innovation Norway, to just get through it. And that I think is incredibly important because you don't want to lose 1.5 years of incredible people innovating. So what we focus a lot on is ensuring that the people who are, see all of those tailwinds, that we can ensure they scale as much as possible now, so that they come out of the crisis much, much stronger than they were coming in. And the ones who have lost a lot of revenue and there's a temporary glut, we put them into survival mode, see if there are temporary revenue streams, other things they can do, so that when it starts growing again, they are in a better position than the rest of the market, right? Because you want to go out there and then be in pole position to innovate and grow. So that's really how we look at this. I think in general, for technology and innovation, this year, as sad as it is, and as much as we've seen, human crisis all across the globe, has been a bit of, I think, overall boost for the digital industry. So anyone who's thinking about, starting to innovate or going out there, now I think it's not only a great opportunity, but on top of that also the world kind of rely on people doing that, because we need to create new jobs and new value to replace the kind of 10% reduction in GDP that has happened everywhere, and the hundreds of millions of people who lost their jobs. So that's kind of how we look at it.
Yeah. No, I mirror that. And I also want to bring you in, Jan Fredrik, because I wouldn't call you a conventional bank, but you're one of the big hitters. And from your vantage point in Singapore, do you share the views of Håkla and Magnus, or do you have anything to add?
Yes. I would say that if you look into how Norway has done this and Singapore, it's quite different. In Norway, we have put in place two main schemes, which is support to the businesses that has reduced revenue because of the pandemic and the shutdown. And secondly, it's the guarantee to support lending to businesses that will survive, as you said, Magnus, after the pandemic, where the Norwegian government actually guarantee for 90%, and the bank takes 10% of the risk. I think that, of course, this pandemic has accelerated the FinTech and how we look at FinTech, how we look at using cash and so on. And this is the same in Singapore as in Norway. I think Norway was a bit ahead before this pandemic. Last autumn in 2019, 7% of all the payments in Norway were by cash. Now it's 3%.
Right.
In Singapore, some years back it was up to 60%. Now it's down to 36 or 37%. And this has happened now, I think, a lot of this decrease has happened actually this year. So this has accelerated a lot of these processes. And I just want to also comment that I said in the beginning here that we are competitors, but what at least we are looking into is partnerships, because this is how this is going to be solved. And as you said as well, there is a lot of regulations within banks, and I think that the banks will not survive without startups, and the startups will not survive without the banks. So there has to be collaboration between the two sectors to move this in the future direction.
Right. Maybe I could just follow up on this. This is an interesting topic. What would you say are important drivers to make that happen? Is it typically something that SFA, or how is that best facilitated?
I think that some of the challenges is that large financial institutions talk to a lot of startups. And the startups really want to collaborate with the large financial institutions. But as a big bank, you cannot choose them all.
No.
So to be aware of this challenge, I think, is really, really important. So because it could be that you work with a startup which has a very good idea, and then you go along, and then you find out, no, this is actually not fitting into our business model, or you want to do it slightly different. And then you have to stop the collaboration. And that could be a hard hit for startups, because they maybe have put all their efforts into this one collaboration and bank. So to help out to, how to say, be aware of these challenges, I think that is key. And also, I think it's good to have independent third party, maybe, that advise both the large banks but also the startups in these collaborations.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in at this point. So just now I mentioned that in Singapore now we have more than 40 innovation labs set up by the financial institutions. Many of them will run their own accelerator programs to facilitate collaboration within the banks and for the banks with the startups. So one way Singapore FinTech Association come to help is to help them promote their acceleration program, not only to our member base, but also to our international partners. Because very often the solution don't just come from Singapore, but all over the world. So we have one of our local banks, UOB. They set up a digital bank, not in Singapore, but in Thailand and in Indonesia. So they work in Thailand, they work with one of the FinTech companies called Personetics to provide analytics. And in Thailand, they work with another FinTech companies to provide alternative data credit scoring. So this is a very common collaboration that we are seeing. But another interesting initiative that Singapore has rolled out is what we call the API exchange platform. This is the collaboration between the MAS, World Bank, and the ASEAN Bankers Association. So basically, by creating an API platform and bringing FinTech companies in and financial institutions in ASEAN on the other side, and to facilitate collaboration with them through the use of API and use of data set and the sandbox environment, that helps to accelerate the partnership between both parties, because typically to do a deal with a bank will take at least 9 to 12 months. But through the use of the API exchange, in a way the due diligence of the startup already done, that helps to reduce the procurement process. And then through the use of API and anonymized data set, that POC between the two parties can be accelerated. So this in a way is to help not just in Singapore, but the larger region, especially the smaller to medium-sized financial institutions, to be able to do digital transformation also. Because unlike the large financial institutions, many of them might not have the necessary resources to do digital innovation by themselves. So this is what I call it FinTech inclusion, other than financial inclusion, to involve the banks to make the financial institutions in the whole region more efficient, more digital, more innovative, so that they can serve the growing region.
Basically a dating site for fintechs and banks.
Yes.
In a way. And essentially you have, I believe, when I met with MAS and we've discussed this, I believe that there is an ambition to take it global. So basically there will be a global or a meeting place for where you can match problem statements with solution providers, essentially. Am I right?
Yes, in fact, this year we started to run a few global hackathons on this platform. So including players like the BNY Mellon Bank and the World Bank also, and United Nations. So they are leveraging on this platform to run their hackathons, inviting solutions from not just startups in Singapore, but all over the world. So for us, our because I think very much similar to Norway, Singapore is a small country. We need to remain open, and this is where we can add value
Right.
Yeah, by playing a role to facilitate this kind of inclusivity with the startups, with the financial institutions.
I wanted also to go back a little bit because we were talking about the kind of response that we've seen from governments and other stakeholders to the crisis. And we've also seen from the panel in Norway essentially discussing the prerequisites for that kind of collaboration to succeed. Basically how you respond to a crisis, the kind of resilience you have in your response, and that, for instance, you need a good infrastructure in place, you need a trust, and also you need a sort of a digital savviness amongst the population. You also need the right people that are digitally competent to do it. But what would you say were the biggest prerequisites in place to succeed with the kind of schemes that you got in place here in Singapore?
I think in many ways, again, Singapore very similar to Norway. I mean, we have a highly digitized society, and COVID-19 actually accelerated a lot of this, including the digital adoption by consumers of all age groups. Yeah. Because we have one of the local banks indicating that 30% of their new customers online are above 50 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the key ingredient is really about trust and a collaborative mindset within Singapore. Because, for example, for Singapore FinTech Association, we took the last 4 years to build up the credibility to be able to deliver, such that MES trusts us and work closely with us to deliver the various initiatives. Because ultimately, there's only so much the government agency can do. You still need a distribution channel to channel all these grants, benefits, funds to the fintech companies.
Exactly.
So that over the last 4 years, we have been working quite closely with them on various initiatives that builds up the trust. And then the ecosystem also comes in to help, because there's a saying that it takes the whole village to raise a child. So fintech is very important to Singapore. So the whole ecosystem came in to help. During COVID-19, there are still organizations that are doing very well, like AMTD Group and Razer. So that's how we reach out to them, and they are willing to provide that backstop funding, to provide the necessary funding for the startup. At least they can ride over the short-term cash flow crisis. Yeah, so I would think that is the most important, trust and ecosystem partnership.
Right. I want to bring you two also into this, because what would you say we could learn, say, from a Norwegian perspective to the response? You said it was quite different, the response that we've seen in Singapore and in Norway. From a Norwegian point of view, what could we learn from this, the response that we've seen in Singapore, and what they've done?
From my point of view, I think the targeted schemes has been very good in Singapore. In Norway, it has been more a broad support to the businesses. Here in Singapore, it has been much more targeted, and this is something that I think we can learn until maybe, or hopefully not next time, but this will happen again, and to have this kind of targeted support, I think that has been very good in Singapore.
Right, so you would say, there's been several schemes also in Norway launched, and I was thinking the compensation scheme obviously being one of them, being one of the national big ones. But also several other various loans and grants and so on. And we discussed this earlier, and you mentioned specifically the pre-existing infrastructure that was in place in Norway prior to the pandemic. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, as it's an important success criteria?
Yes, I think if you listen into the previous discussion in Norway, where there was or is a collaboration between the Norwegian Tax Authority, the Norwegian government, Finance Norway, and the banks to build a solution fully digitalized, and we built that solution in 3 weeks. And that was done by 200 people in different companies, only through digital solutions. They never met physically. And I think this was possible because we have a long tradition on collaborating on infrastructure between banks in Norway. So we have BITS, which is the infrastructure for all the banks. And with a highly digitalized tax authority and the government, it was possible actually to make this solution. And if I can reflect a bit about Singapore when it comes to FinTech, because I think we are highly digitalized in Norway. But what impresses me about Singapore is the global and regional mindset. When you build something in Singapore, you do that to grow not only Singapore, because it's a small country like Norway. You build it to grow regionally and globally. And I think that is really, really something that we should learn from in Norway, because we are on a very high level of digitalization, but it's in Norway. Just to, if you go to, for instance, Germany, with 80 million people, they have between 75 and 80% paying in cash. In Norway, it's 3%, but it's in Europe. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that we should look into when it comes to building FinTech companies in Norway as well.
Yeah, I actually think that's an excellent point, because there's also easier from a regulatory perspective to expand across Europe than it is in Southeast Asia. So it's quite interesting that that hasn't happened on a larger scale, given that it's actually, there's more uniformity in terms of expansion in Europe due to the EU than you still have here due to ASEAN. So it's just such a humongous opportunity, I think, for any Norwegian FinTech company to think more global, think more regional. And it's the same we see here. It's exactly as you said, if you're starting a FinTech business in Singapore, you typically always look Southeast Asian or global. And I think a lot of that comes down to what you were talking about earlier in terms of fostering those international partnerships. You were saying you had, 40 or so global partnerships in the FinTech Association already. Enterprise Singapore, they have offices all across the globe, like Innovation Norway has as well. And really actively trying to get entrepreneurs coming here, as well as getting entrepreneurs to travel abroad and build them. It's such a huge opportunity both here and in Norway in that sense. It's about 600 million people you can serve in Southeast Asia, 1 billion people in India, 1 billion people in China, and in the EU, 450 million or so. It's similar size opportunities, though the way you would approach them is a little bit different. Given the maturity of some of the ecosystems you'd approach here, it's a bit more greenfield work in terms of some of the FinTech stuff. For example, in Indonesia, I think when I came there, when we were building Solora, 3% of our transactions was paid by card, 3%. While if you start an e-commerce company in Norway at the same time, 100% will be paid by cards. So different challenges, but similar opportunities.
Right. I think, conscious of time, I think we will move over then to, and it's a natural segue into the more of the future opportunities, and we're already touched a little bit on it. And as a consequence of the pandemic, we've seen a substantial increase in the number of internet users here in Southeast Asia. I think it's increased by 40 million this past year, and the total number is around 400 million now. And also people have doubled the time they spend online, so twice as much now as pre-COVID-19. And obviously consumer patterns also are affected by this. I heard a number the other day, and that's not specifically for Asia, but that Amazon's share of book sales has increased from 40 to 60% approximately. Considering where they came from, the volume they had originally, that's quite a substantial number. But Magnus, I want to maybe continue with you. With reference to the fintech sector and digital technology at large, maybe, what are the major trends that you see unfolding in the wake of COVID-19? And some of them might have already been in motion prior to the pandemic, but might have accelerated as a consequence of it. It's a big question.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there are almost opportunities across the spectrum of fintech solutions that are coming out of the wake of COVID-19. I don't think anything is related to the pandemic happening. If anything, it's just been an acceleration of already existing trends. Now, I think the way that innovation manifests itself will vary from market to market, but it's quite interesting if you think about it. Take online payments or payment solutions or paying with your phone. That is solving a specific problem where you're traveling somewhere and you want to pay with your phone instead of using cash or a card. In Norway, that was very much sold through whips, and DNB being willing to cannibalize a little bit of their existing business by building out this new digital service that they knew it was coming. Like in every single country across the globe, we just know that over the next few years, more and more people will just pay with their phones. So that problem will be solved. In Norway, it was solved by DNB, the biggest bank, taking leadership. In Pakistan, it was a telco who was leading this charge. In Southeast Asia, it's coming from a lot of different directions, right? You have the transport corporations like Grab and Gojek going heavily into this. You have e-commerce companies, and you have the banks. I think part of the reason why you'll see other players here in the region potentially becoming the leading platform for these types of payments is where they're coming from, right? So, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of countries still in Southeast Asia where people don't have a standard bank account, so their first digital account ends up being with Grab or Gojek.
Exactly.
And that just leads to them potentially leading the race to becoming the leading payment solution here. But it's the same with the e-commerce companies. And at the same time now, the banks are pushing very hard into this territory. Regulations are changing. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. The interesting thing is that the problem will be solved. So that's why I think this having that global view is quite important, because I was we're having lunch yesterday with Sequoia, and they were saying, the way we very much look at investments is we look all across the globe and what's happening in terms of trends. We know it's going to happen, where it hasn't happened already. We don't know how it's going to happen, but we know somebody's going to go and solve this problem. So, of course, online payments still a big thing. Lending, SME financing, working capital financing. You have insurance, huge opportunity. Again, a little bit different. I think in Europe, it's much more about the efficiency of insurance and doing that more effectively and a better customer experience. In Southeast Asia, you have that on top of just providing insurance to people who don't have it already. So, problems similar, but it will be solved in different ways.
Yeah. I want to maybe direct the same question to you, Håklai. What are the big trends that you see as a consequence of COVID-19 or as accelerated by COVID-19?
So I'll talk about it both in terms of short-term to medium to longer term. In terms of short-term trends, we are seeing a K-shaped kind of recovery from two perspectives. Because of COVID-19, certain subsectors are doing very well. Those in payments, those supporting e-commerce, those supporting food delivery, they are doing very well, and they are getting a lot more funding this year. But certain sectors are affected in the short term, especially those in the lending business, because businesses are affected by COVID-19. So non-performing loans will definitely be higher. And then from the funding perspective, there is a flight to safety. That what we are seeing. I alluded earlier, investors are now focusing on protecting their existing portfolio of companies, even increasing the investment. So the early stage companies now are being, in a way, avoided. So they are in the downtrend. But having said that, this whole COVID-19 really accelerated the digital adoption by consumers of all age groups. and businesses of all sizes. So the medium to longer term, I'm seeing a V-shaped recovery, especially in the entire ASEAN region, because even though the region, the market size looks big at 650 million, but it's very fragmented because it is made up of 10 different countries of different regulations, culture, languages. So I see room for a long tail play that whoever can provide very localized solution in each of the market will be able to survive. And ultimately, with more growth coming to Asia, in particular in the ASEAN region, right, the whole economic pie will be enlarged. And I think both incumbents and innovators both can benefit from the enlarged economic pie.
Right. And finally then, Jan Fredrik, DNB is an innovative bank focusing on developing fintech solutions also in-house. You also talk about working with fintech companies, startups and so on. We heard from Kerstin that the digital transformation in banking has changed the entire frontline distribution of your operation. Maybe only 10% of your staff is now working in more traditional conventional branch offices. And that you look to companies like Facebook and Google as a benchmark to how digital you are and the digital offering that you give, because that's where the benchmark needs to be. How are you positioning your operations in the region to adapt to this new situation?
Yeah, I think for a few years now, we have seen these large tech companies as our main competitors when it comes to, and it's about customer solutions. It's about who can provide the best solutions to the customer. Banking is not very interesting in itself. You want to buy a house, you want to do a business, you want to buy a car, but you need a bank to provide you the money. But the bank who can provide you that money or that payment with the best solution will be the winner. So that's why we are focusing on mobile banking, on how can we be the platform that the customer want to be on. So I compare this a bit with the old days, that you have the banks collaborating on the infrastructure, and then you have all the different banks and branches that do business with their customers. And I think the same is happening now, but it's on a different level. You still have a common infrastructure, but you build different solutions on top. And then it's about building the best solution so you can keep your client or your customer on that platform. Because that's it's all about, is to know what the customer wants and how can you give that to the customer, and how can you, and of course, sell more to that customer because you have that knowledge. And if the customer is not on your platform, you don't have the information. And then it will be very hard to survive in the future.
So those that own the interface essentially with the customer, that's where the competitive advantage is going to be in the future, obviously.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Any comments on that?
I mean, I completely agree. It's you find the problem you need to solve, whether that's buying a house or buying a car, and then whoever delivers the best experience of doing that, obviously with potentially, preferably also the lowest cost, will win. And I think this is incredibly important also when you think about tech companies, and if your founders out there, it's important to think that way. You think about a problem you want to solve, which is a use case, which you were just talking about. Then you figure out how you best solve that, and then you utilize the technology that best solves that problem. Sometimes in innovation, you actually see people doing it the other way around, where they say, "Oh, we have some great technology here. Let's see what we can do with it to kind of solve things." And I think it's so important to think about it from that perspective. And you were commenting earlier, and I think DNB is a very innovative bank. I mean, I've been a customer since I was 2 months old, and seen a tremendous growth and change. And we go to Norway now, and there are some places where you can only pay with your phone in the middle of nowhere, up in the mountains, buying a sausage. and it's enabled by DNB. And that transformation has been tremendous. And I think for corporates as well needs to think that way. It's like, exactly as you said, there's a problem that needs to be solved. If somebody else comes there and will solve that better than you do, then that whole business line will be lost. So better figure out how to solve it in the best possible way, and then figure out whether you're going to build it yourself or acquire or partner with, you know, all of those great fintech companies that are coming out and are part of the fintech association and so on, right? And that's what we say to our startups as well, is like, you know, if you can partner with the great institutions that are already out there very early on, you can learn a lot from that, and then it either ends up being a symbiotic relationship or you end up being acquired at some point in time. And obviously that is also quite attractive to a number of entrepreneurs, and then they've solved a big problem for the bank and creates a new line of value creation.
Yeah. I think with that we essentially have to conclude, since we're coming towards the end of the allotted time that we have at our disposal. I would like to engage also in the future with you, obviously, to explore how we can take these opportunities forward together. The element of collaboration here is obviously quite interesting, like you mentioned, I think all of you. For now, I would like to thank our partners, the Norwegian Embassy in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, as well as NCE Finance Innovation and Finans Norge, or Finance Norway, back home in Norway. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our panelists, Håklai, Jan Fredrik, and Magnus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then also my Ambassador Anita Nergård, who gave the opening remarks earlier on today. And with that, I wish you all a good day.